The first thing Claire Bennett noticed when the black car stopped in front of the iron gates was the silence. No birds, no wind, just two men in dark suits watching her from behind the bars, like she was already a problem they had to solve. She had been told to come at 9 in the morning, not a minute later. She had been told to bring only one bag. She had been told, in a voice that did not invite questions, that once she stepped through those gates, she would not discuss anything she saw inside with anyone outside. She had agreed to all of it. She needed the job too badly to argue. 3 months ago, her husband Peter had died in a car accident on a wet road outside the city. 3 months ago, she had a small apartment, a joint bank account, and a life she thought was steady. Now she had unpaid bills stacked on the kitchen counter, and a landlord who had stopped being patient. When the recruitment agency called and said a private household needed a full-time housekeeper, paying triple what she used to earn, she had not asked many questions. She had just said yes. It was only after she said yes that they told her whose house it was. Damien Cross. She had heard the name before, the way people hear names they are supposed to be afraid of. He was spoken about in low voices, in half-finished sentences, in stories that always trailed off before the ending. Some people said he ran half the shipping routes in the city. Others said he ran much more than that, and that the shipping was only what people were allowed to see. None of that mattered to Claire now. What mattered was the down payment on rent she could finally make, and the letter she could finally stop dreading. One of the men at the gate stepped forward and asked for her name. She gave it. He checked a list on a tablet, nodded once, and the gates opened without a sound, as if they had been made to never announce anything. The driveway was long, lined with trees so straight they looked planted with a ruler. The house at the end of it was not what she expected. She had imagined something loud, something that showed off. Instead, the house was quiet stone and dark windows, more like a fortress trying to look like a home than a home trying to look grand. A woman was waiting on the front steps. She introduced herself as Margaret Doyle, the head of household staff, and she did not smile when she shook Claire's hand. "You will report to me for your duties," Margaret said, "but you will answer to Mr. Cross if he asks you anything directly. Do you understand?" "Yes," Claire said. "There are rooms in this house you are not to enter. I will show you which ones. There are questions you are not to ask. I will not need to show you which ones, because you will feel it when you get close to one." Claire nodded, though her stomach had started to tighten. Margaret led her through the house, room by room, explaining what needed to be cleaned, and how, and what needed to be left untouched. The kitchen was enormous, brighter than the rest of the house, and Claire felt herself relax slightly there, since it looked like any other kitchen in any other large home. The living areas were heavy with dark wood and thick curtains that blocked most of the daylight. A hallway on the second floor had a locked door at the very end of it, and when they passed it, Margaret did not slow down, did not explain, did not even glance at it. She simply walked faster until they were well past it. Claire noticed. She always noticed things. It was a habit Peter used to tease her about, the way she picked up on small details other people missed. A stain that did not match anything else in a room, a photograph turned slightly out of place, a silence that lasted 1 second too long. She filed the locked door away in her memory without asking about it, because she had promised herself, on the drive over, that she would not ask questions in this house. Not on the first day, maybe not ever. She met Damien Cross for the first time at 6 in the evening. She was in the kitchen, going over the schedule Margaret had left her, when she heard footsteps that were different from the others in the house. Slower, heavier, more deliberate. She turned around, and he was simply there, standing in the doorway, watching her the way a man watches something he has not decided whether to trust yet. He was younger than she expected, late 30s, maybe 40, with dark hair cut close, and a face that gave away nothing. His shirt was plain, no jewelry, nothing that announced money the way she had assumed a man like him would want to announce it. What struck her most was how still he stood, not relaxed. Still, the way a predator is still before it decides to move. "You're the new housekeeper," he said. It was not a question. "Yes, sir. Claire Bennett." He studied her for a moment longer than felt comfortable. "Margaret showed you the house?" "Yes." "Then you know which rooms are yours to clean and which are not." "I do." "Good," he said. "Stay inside those lines. and you'll have no trouble here." He turned and walked away before she could respond, and she stood there for a long moment after he was gone, aware that her heart was beating faster than it should have been for such a short conversation. That night, she was given a small room on the ground floor, near the kitchen, simple but clean, with a narrow bed and a window that looked out over a garden she was told she was welcome to walk in during her free hours. She lay awake for a long time, listening to the unfamiliar sounds of the house settling around her, the creak of old wood, the distant murmur of men talking somewhere she could not place, footsteps that passed her door and did not stop. She thought about Peter. She thought about how strange it was that his death had led her here, into a house with locked doors and armed men at the gate, working for a man whose name made people go quiet. She told herself it was only temporary. She told herself she would save enough money, find something safer, and leave before she got too comfortable, before she got too curious. She did not know yet how wrong that plan would turn out to be. She woke before dawn on her first full morning in the house, the unfamiliar quiet pressing against her ears in a way that made sleep impossible to return to. She lay in the narrow bed for a while, staring at the ceiling, listening for any sound that might tell her what kind of day was waiting for her. When she finally rose and dressed, she found the kitchen already busy with early activity, staff moving through practiced routines that she had no part of yet, everyone aware of exactly where they belonged except for her. Margaret found her standing uncertainly near the doorway and handed her an apron without comment, simply nodding toward the long counter where trays needed preparing. Claire fell into the rhythm quickly, grateful for the distraction of simple physical work, the kind of task that asked nothing of her except steady hands and attention to detail. It was during that first breakfast service that she caught her first real glimpse of the scale of the household she had joined. Men she did not recognize came and went through the side entrance, speaking briefly with members of staff before disappearing again into other parts of the estate. None of them looked at her directly, though she felt more than one gaze pass over her with quiet assessment, the kind of attention that made her grateful for Margaret's steady presence nearby. The first week passed in a blur of routine. She learned the rhythm of the house, which rooms needed attention every day, which staff members were friendly, and which kept to themselves, which hallways felt normal, and which made the hair on her arms rise for no reason she could name. She learned that Margaret ran the household with the precision of someone who had done it for decades, and trusted no one completely, not even herself. She learned that Henry Voss, one of the guards at the gate, had a habit of nodding at her every morning, like they were old friends, even though they had barely spoken a dozen words to each other. She learned that Damien Cross kept to a strict schedule. He left early most mornings, and returned late most evenings. When he was home, he mostly stayed in his study, a room on the far side of the house that Claire was allowed to clean only when he was not in it, and only for a short, specific window of time. It was during one of those cleaning sessions, on her 5th day, that she noticed the portrait. It hung on the wall of the study, but unlike every other painting in the house, this one was turned to face the wall, its back showing instead of its front, as if someone had deliberately hidden whatever image it held. She almost reached out to turn it around, curiosity pulling at her fingers, but she stopped herself. She remembered Margaret's warning. She remembered the locked door at the end of the hallway. She left the portrait exactly as it was, and finished her work quickly, glancing at the door more than once, half expecting Damien to appear and ask her what she thought she was doing. He did not appear. But that night, over a simple dinner in the staff kitchen, one of the older maids, a quiet woman named Ruth, mentioned the portrait without Claire even bringing it up. "That painting used to hang the right way," Ruth said, stirring her tea. "Years ago, before my time here, but I heard about it. Something happened, and Mr. Cross had it turned around. Nobody's touched it since." "What happened?" Claire asked before she could stop herself. Ruth's face changed, the easy conversation shutting down like a door closing. "Not my place to say. Not yours to ask, dear. Not if you want to keep this job." Claire let the subject drop, but she did not forget it. She found herself thinking about the painting at strange moments, while she folded linens, while she walked through the garden during her break, while she lay in bed at night. There was a story behind that turned frame, and something in her, the same something that used to drive Peter half crazy with amusement, refused to let it go. 2 weeks into her employment, She had her second real conversation with Damien Cross, and it changed the way she saw him, even if only slightly. It happened by accident. She had stayed late finishing a task in the kitchen, and by the time she was done, most of the house had gone quiet for the night. She was walking back toward her room when she passed the study and saw the door slightly open, light spilling out into the dark hallway. She should have kept walking. Instead, she slowed down, and through the gap in the door, she saw him sitting alone at his desk, not working, not reading, just sitting there, with his head in his hands, looking like a man carrying something far heavier than anyone in this house would guess, from the way he carried himself during the day. She must have made a sound, because he looked up suddenly, and their eyes met through the gap in the door. For a moment, neither of them said anything. "I didn't mean to disturb you," she said quickly, already stepping back. "You didn't." His voice was quieter than she had heard it before, less guarded. "Come in, if you want." She hesitated, but something in his tone made her push the door open and step inside. The study was warm, lit by a single lamp, and up close, she could see the exhaustion in his face that his usual composure hid so well during the day. "You're up late," he said. "So are you." A faint, tired smile crossed his face, gone almost as soon as it appeared. "Comes with the job." "What job is that, exactly?" The question left her mouth before she could think better of it, and she immediately regretted it, bracing herself for the cold, closed expression she had seen on her first day. Instead, he studied her for a long moment, as if deciding something. "The kind that doesn't let you sleep much," he finally said. "The kind where you're always waiting for something to go wrong, because eventually, it always does." "That sounds exhausting." "It is." He looked at her more closely then, the way he had on her first day, but this time, it felt different, less like judgment, and more like curiosity. "You ask a lot of questions for someone who was told not to." Her cheeks warmed. "I'm sorry, I'll stop." "I didn't say I minded." He leaned back in his chair. "Most people in this house are too afraid to say more than 5 words to me at a time. It's strangely refreshing." She did not know what to say to that, so she said nothing, and for a while, they simply sat in a silence that was not uncomfortable, the lamp casting long shadows across the room, the turned portrait watching them both from the wall with its blank wooden back. "You should go rest," he said eventually. "Long day tomorrow." She nodded and turned to leave, but at the door, she paused and looked back at him. "Good night, Mr. Cross." "Damien," he said. "When it's just us, you can call me Damien." She walked back to her room with her heart beating strangely in her chest, and she told herself it meant nothing, that it was simply a moment of 2 tired people talking in an empty house late at night. She told herself that several more times before she finally fell asleep, and she almost believed it. She did not see him again the following day, and the day after that passed much the same way, both of them apparently occupied by their separate responsibilities, though Claire caught herself glancing toward the study more than once, wondering if their late-night conversation had meant as much to him as it had to her, or if it had simply been a passing moment born of exhaustion, easily forgotten by morning. She got her answer on the 3rd day, when she found a small folded note tucked beneath her cup during breakfast, left there by someone who clearly did not want to be seen delivering it. It was brief, just a few lines in careful handwriting, asking if she would be willing to walk with him in the garden that evening, if her duties allowed it. She read it twice before tucking it into her apron pocket, a small, unfamiliar happiness settling over her for the rest of the day. That evening's walk became the first of many, an easy habit forming between them without either of them ever formally deciding it should. Sometimes they spoke about small things, books she had read, places he had traveled for business though rarely for pleasure, memories of childhood that felt safe enough to share. Other times they walked in comfortable silence, content simply to exist together for a while outside the pressures that otherwise defined both of their days. Over the next several days, small moments like that one began to happen more often. A shared cup of coffee in the early morning kitchen, when neither of them expected the other to be awake yet. A brief conversation in the garden, when he found her sitting on a bench during her break, staring at nothing in particular. He never spoke about his work, never explained the guards at the gate, or the guns she sometimes glimpsed beneath the jackets of the men who visited, but he spoke about other things, small things, ordinary things, the kind of things that made him seem less like the dangerous name people whispered in the city, and more like a man who happened to be very tired and very alone. Claire found herself looking forward to those moments more than she wanted to admit. She told herself it was only natural, that after Peter's death she had been starving for any kind of connection, any proof that she was still a person capable of talking to someone without breaking down. She told herself it had nothing to do with the way Damien's guarded expression softened slightly whenever she walked into a room. She was not entirely honest with herself, and some part of her knew it. But even as she allowed herself these small comforts, the questions about the house never fully left her mind. The locked door at the end of the hallway, the portrait turned to face the wall, the way certain staff members flinched whenever a particular name was mentioned in passing, a name she had not yet learned, spoken only in fragments before someone cut the conversation short. She was a housekeeper in a Mafia boss's home, cleaning around silence and secrets, and she was beginning to understand that this house did not just hide objects behind locked doors. It hid a history, one that she suspected, without knowing why, might have something to do with her more than she could possibly imagine yet. There were other small moments during those early weeks that stayed with her, moments she turned over in her mind while she worked. One morning, she found Henry Voss standing near the garden wall, staring out at the trees with an expression far too troubled for a simple morning shift. "You look like you didn't sleep," she said, setting down a tray of coffee she had brought out for the guards on duty, a small kindness Margaret had never told her to do, but that felt natural after so many quiet mornings in the house. Henry accepted a cup gratefully, some of the tension easing from his shoulders. "Long night. Nothing you need to worry about." "Everything here seems to be something I'm not supposed to worry about," she said, half joking, though the words carried more weight than she intended. He gave her a small, tired smile. "That's the job, Miss Bennet. The less you know, the safer you sleep. Mr. Cross is careful about that, more careful than most men in his position." "Careful how?" Henry glanced toward the house, as if considering how much he was allowed to say. "He doesn't let the ugly parts of this life touch the people who work here. Not if he can help it. Some of the men he does business with, they don't think twice about who gets hurt along the way. Mr. Cross isn't built like that, not since I've known him anyway." It was a small comment, offered without much weight behind it, but Claire carried it with her for days afterward, turning it over the way she turned over every unexplained detail in this house. She had expected, when she first walked through those gates, to find a man who matched every frightening rumor she had ever heard. Instead, she kept finding small pieces of evidence that suggested something more complicated, something the whispers in the city never seemed to capture. She settled slowly into a rhythm of her own within the household, waking early to help prepare the kitchen before the rest of the staff arrived, spending her afternoons moving through the quiet, orderly rooms of the house with a steadiness that gradually returned some sense of normal life to her days. In the evenings, after her work was finished, she often walked the garden paths alone, watching the sun set behind the tall trees that lined the property, allowing herself, for the first time since Peter's death, small moments of peace. Margaret remained strict but fair, correcting Claire's mistakes without unnecessary harshness, occasionally offering a rare compliment when a task was done particularly well. Ruth grew warmer as the weeks passed, sharing small stories about the house during their shared breaks, careful always to stop short of anything that touched on the family's darker business, though her silences on those subjects had begun to feel less like walls and more like doors that simply had not opened yet. Claire found herself growing curious, not just about the locked room and the turned portrait, but about Damien Cross himself, the contradictions in him that did not fit the stories she had heard before ever meeting him. A man feared throughout the city, and yet a man who insisted, according to Henry, on shielding his household staff from the darker corners of his world. A man with cold, guarded eyes on their first meeting, and yet a man who had looked, during their second conversation, more exhausted and human than powerful. She reminded herself often, during those early weeks, that curiosity was a dangerous habit in a house like this one. She reminded herself, and continued to notice things anyway, because it was simply who she was, and no amount of caution seemed able to change that fully. She would not learn how right that suspicion was until the storm came, 3 weeks later, and trapped her in the one part of the house she had been told, from her very first day, never to enter. The storm arrived without much warning, the kind that rolled in fast off the coast and turned a calm evening into howling wind and hammering rain within the space of an hour. Claire had been sent to gather laundry from the upper floor before the power could go out, moving quickly through hallways lit only by flickering lamps as thunder rattled the windows. She was almost done when the lights failed completely, plunging the entire second floor into darkness. She stood still for a moment, heart pounding, waiting for her eyes to adjust, listening to the rain hammering against the roof and the wind screaming through the trees outside. When a flash of lightning lit the hallway for half a second, she realized she was standing directly in front of the locked door at the end of the corridor. Except, in the chaos of the storm, in the rush to close windows and secure the house before the worst of it hit, someone had left it slightly open. Claire stood frozen, staring at that narrow gap of darkness beyond the door, rain lashing the windows behind her, thunder rolling low and long across the sky. Every warning she had been given echoed in her mind. Margaret's voice, Ruth's careful silence, Damien's quiet insistence, on her very first day to stay inside the lines. But her hand was already reaching for the door, before her mind had finished deciding. The room beyond was smaller than she expected, and colder, as if it had not been heated in years. Another flash of lightning showed her the shapes inside before her eyes could fully adjust. A desk pushed against one wall, shelves lined with boxes, a single armchair facing a cold fireplace. It looked less like a hidden secret and more like a room someone had simply stopped using, frozen in time, and left to gather dust. She knew she should leave. Every second she stood there was a second she was breaking the one rule she had been given above all others. But her eyes had already caught sight of something on the desk, a stack of old boxes with faded labels, and her feet carried her closer before her better judgment could stop them. Thunder cracked directly overhead, so loud it made her flinch, and in that same instant, she heard footsteps in the hallway behind her, fast and heavy, coming straight toward the open door. She barely had time to step back before Damien appeared in the doorway, a flashlight in his hand, his expression shifting from urgency to something far more guarded the moment he saw where she was standing. "What are you doing in here?" he said. It was not really a question. His voice had gone flat and careful, the same tone she imagined he used with people he did not trust. "The door was open," Claire said quickly. "I saw it when the lights went out. I wasn't trying to." "This room is not part of the house you clean." He stepped inside, closing the gap between them, the beam of his flashlight cutting across the dusty shelves. "I told you that on your first day." "I know. I'm sorry." She meant it, and she could hear the sincerity in her own voice, but she also could not stop herself from glancing once more at the boxes on the desk, at the shapes of old photographs just visible beneath a layer of dust. He noticed where she was looking, and for a moment, something flickered across his face that she could not name. Not anger exactly, something closer to old grief, quickly buried again beneath his usual composure. "Go back to your room," he said, quieter now. "Please." She did not argue. She slipped past him into the hallway, the storm still raging outside, and she did not look back until she reached the stairs, where she paused just long enough to see him standing alone in the doorway of that room, staring inside it the way a person stares at a memory they wish they could avoid. She lay awake most of that night, replaying the moment over and over, trying to understand the look on his face, trying to understand why a simple storage room could hold that much weight for a man who otherwise seemed so completely in control of everything around him. The next morning, everything returned to its usual rhythm, as if the storm and the open door and the strange moment between them had never happened. Damien left early, as he always did, and Margaret handed Claire her list of tasks, without any indication that she knew what had occurred the night before. Claire almost convinced herself she had imagined the whole thing. Almost. But something had shifted between her and Damien after that night, something she could feel, even though neither of them spoke of it directly. He began seeking her out more often, not just during quiet late hours, but during the day as well, finding small reasons to talk to her, asking about her life before she had come to work in his house. She told him about Peter, carefully, the way people talk about grief they have not fully processed, choosing her words to keep the deepest parts of the pain hidden even as she shared the surface of it. She told him about growing up in a smaller town outside the city, about a father who had worked long hours and rarely spoke about what he did, about a childhood that felt, in hindsight, strangely quiet, in ways she had never fully questioned until now. Damien listened more than he spoke, which surprised her. When he did share pieces of his own life, they came slowly, carefully chosen, as if he were testing how much he could say before something inside him decided to close the door again. He told her about a father who had built the world he now lived in, a father whose expectations had shaped every decision Damien had made since he was old enough to understand what those expectations meant. He told her, in vague terms that avoided any real detail, about the price of leading a life like his, the constant awareness that trust was a luxury he could rarely afford. "Do you trust anyone?" she asked him one evening, the two of them sitting on the back terrace as the sun went down over the garden. He considered the question for a long time before answering. "I used to think I didn't. Lately, I'm not so sure anymore." She felt her pulse quicken at the way he looked at her when he said it, and she told herself, once again, that it meant nothing, that she was reading too much into a simple sentence from a lonely man who had few people left in his life to talk to honestly. She told herself that even as the distance between them, day by day, conversation by conversation, continued to shrink. One afternoon, Damien surprised her by appearing in the garden while she was on her break, carrying 2 cups of tea, instead of sending someone to fetch her the way she half expected. He sat down on the bench beside her without asking, handing her one of the cups, and for a while, neither of them spoke, content simply to sit together in the mild afternoon sun. "Margaret tells me you've been doing good work," he said eventually. "Margaret doesn't strike me as someone who gives compliments easily." A short laugh escaped him, rare and unguarded. "She isn't, which means you've earned it." Claire smiled despite herself, warmth spreading through her chest at the small victory. "I like it here. More than I expected to, honestly. I thought I'd feel like an outsider the whole time. It doesn't feel that way anymore." "You're not an outsider," Damien said, his voice quieter now. "Not to me, anyway." She glanced at him, searching his expression, and found something there that made her look away quickly, unsure what to do with the warmth building steadily beneath her ribs whenever he spoke to her like that. Their conversations continued in this pattern over the following days, brief but meaningful moments stolen between his responsibilities and hers, each one chipping away further at the careful distance that had defined their first meeting. He told her, slowly, about the pressure of running a business built on his father's legacy, the constant vigilance required to protect what had been built, the exhaustion of never fully trusting the motives of anyone around him. "How do you manage it?" she asked him one evening. "Living like that, always watching, never fully resting?" "Most days I don't manage it well," he admitted. "I've gotten good at appearing calm. That's different from actually being calm." "You seem calm around me," she said before she could stop herself. He considered this for a long moment. "That's because I am. Around you." "I'm not entirely sure why." Claire did not have an answer for that, and she was grateful when he did not push for one, allowing the comment to settle quietly between them instead. Another small brick added to the foundation, slowly building beneath everything unspoken in their growing friendship. She began to notice, too, how differently the household staff treated her as the weeks continued. Where once she had simply been the newest hire, unfamiliar and cautiously watched, she now found herself included in small moments of daily life around the estate. Ruth saved her a seat during the staff's shared lunch. One of the younger kitchen staff, a boy barely out of his teenage years, began greeting her by name each morning with genuine warmth. Even Margaret, in her own reserved way, seemed to be extending a kind of quiet trust that had not been there during Claire's first days. It was a strange thing, she thought, to feel more at home inside the guarded walls of a Mafia boss's estate than she had felt anywhere since Peter's death. She did not examine that feeling too closely, afraid of what she might find if she did, choosing instead to simply let herself exist within it, day by day, conversation by conversation, moment by careful moment. It was nearly 2 weeks after the storm, when Claire found herself alone in the house on a quiet afternoon, most of the staff sent into the city for supplies, Damien away at a meeting he had not explained the purpose of. Margaret had asked her to check on a leak reported near the upstairs hallway, and it was during that errand that Claire noticed the door to the forbidden room was, once again, not fully closed. She told herself she would only glance inside to be sure everything was secure, nothing more. She told herself this the way people tell themselves small lies right before they do the thing they already know they should not do. The room looked exactly as it had during the storm, dust thick over every surface, the same stack of boxes on the desk. This time, without the panic of thunder and darkness, she allowed herself a full look around, and her eyes settled again on those boxes, on the edges of old photographs peeking out from beneath torn envelopes and yellowed papers. She knew she should turn around. She knew that every step further into that room was a step she could not take back, but something about the quiet stillness of the space pulled at her, the same instinct that had always made her notice the small details other people overlooked, the same instinct that told her this room was not simply forgotten, it was hidden, deliberately. And there was a difference between those two things that mattered more than she yet understood. She moved closer to the desk, her fingers hovering over the edge of the nearest box. Somewhere outside, she heard a car pull into the driveway, distant and easy to dismiss, the ordinary sound of daily life continuing around her. She told herself she had a few minutes at least, enough time to satisfy the curiosity that had been building inside her since her very first day in this house. She lifted the lid of the box. Inside were photographs, dozens of them, spanning what looked like decades based on the fading colors and changing styles of clothing in each image. Faces she did not recognize stared back at her from another time, men in dark suits, standing in front of buildings she could not place, gatherings that looked more like business meetings than family occasions. She sifted through them carefully, aware of the passing minutes, aware that she was pushing her luck further than she should. Most of the photographs meant nothing to her, strangers from a life she had no connection to. Until she reached one near the bottom of the box. The photograph showed two men standing together, outside a modest house she almost recognized, though she could not place why. One of the men was clearly a younger version of someone whose features she had come to know very well over the past weeks, the sharp jaw, the guarded eyes, unmistakably an early version of Damien's father. The other man, standing beside him with his arm around his shoulder in a gesture of easy familiarity, made Claire's breath catch in her throat. She had seen that face before, not in this house, not in this life. She had seen it in the old photo albums her mother used to keep on a shelf in their living room, photo albums Claire had not opened in years, not since her mother passed, and she had packed those albums away into storage, along with the rest of her childhood. The man standing beside Damien's father, smiling easily at the camera in a photograph that looked decades old, was her own father. Claire's hands began to shake as she stared at the image, her mind racing through explanations, trying to make sense of something that felt impossible. Coincidence, she told herself. A resemblance, nothing more. Her father had been an ordinary man, a quiet accountant who kept to himself, who never spoke about powerful friends or complicated pasts. There was no reason his face should appear in a hidden box of photographs belonging to a family whose name people whispered with fear across the entire city. But the more she stared at the photograph, the more certain she became. It was him. She would know that face anywhere, even faded and decades younger than the version she remembered. She was so absorbed in the image that she did not hear the footsteps approaching until it was far too late to hide what she had found. "I told you," Damien said from the doorway, his voice low and controlled in a way that frightened her more than shouting would have, "to never come into this room." Claire turned, the photograph still clutched in her trembling hand, and found him standing there, his expression unlike anything she had seen from him before. Not anger exactly, but something far more complicated, something that looked almost like fear. "Damien," she said carefully, "I need you to tell me why my father is in this photograph." The silence that followed stretched long enough that Claire could hear her own heartbeat pounding in her ears, long enough for the last of the daylight outside the window to shift and dim, long enough for her to understand, with a growing sense of dread, that whatever answer was coming would change everything she thought she understood about the past 3 months of her life. Damien stepped further into the room, closing the door quietly behind him, as if he did not want anyone else in the house to overhear whatever he was about to say. He looked older suddenly, the weight in his shoulders more visible than she had ever seen it, and when he finally spoke, his voice had lost its usual guarded edge. "Your father's name was George Bennett," he said. It was not a question. Claire's breath caught. She had never told him her father's full name. "How do you know that?" "Because I've known since the day you walked through my gates." He rubbed a hand across his face, sitting down slowly in the old armchair facing the cold fireplace, looking suddenly like a man carrying a weight he had held alone for far too long. "I recognized the name on your application before you ever stepped inside this house." Claire felt the ground shift beneath her, the careful order of her recent life unraveling with every word. "Then why hire me? Why let me anywhere near this place if you knew?" Damien was quiet for a long moment, staring at the photograph still in her hand. "Sit down, Claire. This is going to take a while to explain, and you deserve to hear all of it." She sat, cautiously, on the edge of the desk, her eyes never leaving him. Outside, the last of the daylight continued to fade, the room growing dimmer around them, though neither of them moved to turn on another light, as if the shadows made the coming conversation somehow easier to bear. "My father and yours grew up together," Damien began. "In the same neighborhood, on the same street. Before any of this," he gestured vaguely, meaning the house, the gates, the guarded life they both now lived inside. They were just two young men trying to build something out of nothing. "Your father was smarter than mine in every way that mattered. Numbers, planning. He saw patterns other people missed." Claire thought of her father hunched over the kitchen table at night, papers spread in front of him, a man she had always assumed was simply careful with the family finances. She had never imagined those same skills belonging to a different kind of life entirely. "My father built his business with your father's help," Damien continued. "In the early years, everything they built together was legitimate. Real estate, shipping contracts. It was only later that my father made choices your father did not agree with. Choices that took the business somewhere darker. Your father tried to pull away. He wanted no part of what it was becoming." "What happened?" Claire asked, though some part of her already dreaded the answer. "My father did not make it easy for him to leave," Damien said quietly. "There were disagreements. Threats, though I don't believe my father ever intended to follow through on them. Your father took the risk anyway. He walked away, took a much smaller, much safer life for himself and his family, and cut every tie to my father's world completely. He never spoke of it again, as far as I know. Not even to you." Claire pressed a hand to her mouth, memories rearranging themselves in her mind. Small, strange moments from her childhood, suddenly making a different kind of sense. The way her father had flinched whenever certain cars slowed near their house. The way he had insisted, every single year, on the same quiet neighborhood, the same unremarkable job, the same careful invisible life. She had always assumed it was simply who he was. She had never imagined it was a choice he had made to protect her. "Why is his photograph hidden in this room?" she asked. "Why is that portrait in your study turned to face the wall?" Damien's jaw tightened. "Because my father never forgave him for leaving. He saw it as a betrayal, even though your father only wanted an honest life. When your father died, years later, my father refused to even acknowledge it. He turned that portrait around the day he learned of it, and he never spoke your father's name again. I kept these boxes because I couldn't bring myself to throw away the only proof that once, before everything became what it is now, my father and yours were simply friends who believed they could build something good together." Claire felt tears building behind her eyes, grief for a father she thought she had already fully mourned rising back to the surface in a way she had not expected. "Why hire me then, knowing all of this?" Damien met her eyes directly. "Because when I saw your name on that application, I realized I finally had a chance to make something right that my father broke a long time ago. I couldn't undo what happened between them, but I could make sure George Bennett's daughter never had to struggle the way you were struggling when you applied for this job. I looked into your situation before I ever agreed to hire you. I knew about your husband. I knew about the debts. I told myself I was simply offering an honest job to someone who needed one." "And now?" Claire asked quietly. Something shifted in his expression, an honesty breaking through the careful control he usually kept over every word. "Now I'm not entirely sure that was the only reason anymore." The silence between them stretched long and heavy, filled with everything neither of them had said outright, but both now understood clearly. Claire looked down at the photograph still in her hand, at her father's easy smile from decades ago, a version of him she had never known existed. "I need time," she finally said, "to understand all of this." "Take whatever time you need," Damien said, standing slowly. "I should have told you the truth the day you arrived. I'm sorry I didn't." He left the room quietly, and Claire remained there for a long while, sitting among the dusty boxes and old photographs, holding the one image that had unraveled everything she thought she knew about her father's careful, quiet life. Over the following days, Claire found herself moving through the house in a strange daze, performing her duties out of habit, while her mind circled endlessly around everything Damien had told her. She thought about her father's hands, always steady, always careful, and wondered how much of that carefulness had been born from fear rather than simple discipline. She thought about the quiet neighborhood she had grown up in, the ordinary job, the complete absence of any extended family stories, and understood now that all of it had been a deliberate wall, built to keep her safe from a world she had just accidentally stepped straight into. She did not avoid Damien during those days, but their conversations grew quieter, more careful, both of them navigating the new weight that now sat openly between them. She noticed, though, that he had started leaving the study door open more often when he worked in the evenings, as if inviting her in without needing to say so directly. She noticed that Margaret's sharp instructions had softened slightly toward her, small kindnesses appearing that had not been there before, a second cup of tea left out in the mornings, an easier tone whenever they spoke. One evening, unable to sleep, Claire took out the old photograph she had kept, the one image Damien had allowed her to hold on to, and studied it under the small lamp beside her bed. She traced the outline of her father's younger face with her fingertip, trying to reconcile this laughing, easy young man with the quiet, careful figure she remembered from her childhood, the man who checked the locks on their doors twice every night and never once explained why. She thought about the arguments she barely remembered from when she was very young, hushed voices behind closed doors that had stopped entirely by the time she was old enough to understand words. She thought about the sudden move to a smaller town when she was 7, a move her father had always explained as wanting a quieter life, nothing more. She understood now that every one of those unexplained moments had likely been her father quietly steering his family away from danger, protecting her so completely that she had never even known there was anything to be protected from. It left her with a strange, complicated grief, mourning not just the father she had lost, but the fuller, more complete version of him she had never gotten the chance to know. She found herself wishing, more than once during those quiet nights, that she could ask him directly about the young man in the photograph, about the friendship with Damien's father, about everything he had chosen to carry alone, rather than pass the weight of it onto her. She spoke to Damien about this one evening, the two of them walking slowly through the garden after most of the household had gone to sleep. "Do you think he was happy?" she asked, "before everything changed?" "I think so," Damien said carefully. "From what little I know, those early years were good ones, for both our fathers. It was only later, once ambition and fear started shaping every decision, that things became complicated." "I wish I could have known that version of him," Claire admitted. "The one in the photograph." "I think," Damien said gently, "that in choosing the quiet life he built for you, he made sure you never had to become someone who needed to disappear into a version of himself he wasn't proud of. That was its own kind of gift, even if it came with silence attached." Claire considered this for a long while, letting the words settle over the grief she had been carrying, and found, to her surprise, that they helped ease some of the weight she had felt since first finding that photograph hidden away in the dust of a forgotten room. It was nearly a week later, during a quiet afternoon in the garden, that Claire finally found the words to ask the question that had been building inside her since the moment she first saw that photograph. "Did your father ever hurt mine?" she asked. "Before he left? Is that why my father was always so afraid?" Damien, sitting beside her on the stone bench, was quiet for a long moment before answering honestly. "There were threats made, yes. I don't know all the details. I was young when it happened. But I know my father regretted, later in life, how far things went before your father finally left. I believe that regret is part of why he could never look at that portrait again, It reminded him of a friendship he destroyed with his own choices. Claire absorbed this slowly, watching the late afternoon light fall through the garden trees. My father never told me any of it, not one word. He was protecting you, Damien said gently. The same way I've been trying to protect you since the day you walked through my gates, even if I didn't do it in the most honest way possible. She turned to look at him then, searching his face for any sign of the guarded stranger she had met on her first day, and finding instead someone far more open than she had ever expected a man like him to allow himself to be. I don't blame you, she said quietly, for any of it. Your father's choices were not yours, and what you've done since I arrived here, hiring me, protecting me, even hiding the truth at first. I understand why you made those decisions, even if I wish you had trusted me sooner. Relief passed visibly across his face, quickly followed by something warmer, something that made Claire's pulse quicken the way it had on so many quiet evenings over the past weeks. There's something else you should know, Damien said carefully, and the shift in his tone immediately put Claire on alert. It's not only my father's old choices that connect our families. There's someone else, someone still very much alive, who has never forgiven the past either, and who has recently begun asking questions about you specifically. Claire's stomach tightened. Who? Damien's expression darkened, the careful calm he usually maintained slipping just enough to reveal genuine concern underneath it. His name is Victor Lane. He was my father's closest rival for many years, and he has never forgotten that your father's early planning helped my family gain advantages. Victor's family never fully recovered from. If he learns you're living here, under my protection, he may see it as an opportunity worth pursuing. The peaceful afternoon suddenly felt far more fragile than it had a moment before, the quiet garden around them no longer feeling as safe as Claire had allowed herself to believe. What kind of opportunity? Claire asked, though part of her already dreaded the answer. Victor has spent years looking for any weakness in my family's position, Damien said. A connection to your father, someone he could use to unsettle me or gain leverage, would matter to him more than you might expect. I don't say this to frighten you. I say it because I think you deserve to understand exactly what you've stepped into, now that you know the rest of the story. Claire wrapped her arms around herself despite the mild evening air, the sense of safety she had slowly built over the past weeks, now feeling thin and uncertain. Is that why the guards at the gate? Why all the rules about which rooms I could enter? Partly, Damien admitted. Though the truth is, this life comes with constant caution, regardless of who is or isn't a target at any given moment. But yes, since I learned your name, I've taken extra steps to keep information about you as quiet as possible. Extra steps that apparently weren't enough, if Victor already knows about me. Damien's expression tightened. I don't yet know how much he knows. My people are looking into how word may have reached him. It's possible it's nothing more than idle rumor, staff gossip finding its way where it shouldn't. It's also possible it's more deliberate than that. Claire felt a chill that had nothing to do with the cooling evening air. What do you want me to do? For now, nothing changes, Damien said. You continue your work, your routine, exactly as before. I'll increase security around the property without making it obvious to the rest of the staff. And I'll handle Victor Lane the way I've handled every threat that's come before him. Something in the flat certainty of his voice should have reassured her. Instead, it only reminded her how dangerous the world around him truly was, how easily concern could turn into consequence in a life like his. Over the following days, Claire noticed subtle changes throughout the estate. More guards patrolling the grounds at night. Henry Voss no longer simply nodding at her each morning, but watching the driveway with a new, sharper attention. Margaret's instructions grew stricter again, doors that had recently opened slightly wider now closing back to their original careful boundaries. Despite the growing tension, Claire found herself drawn closer to Damien rather than further away. Perhaps it was the shared history now binding their families together in ways neither of them had chosen. Perhaps it was simply the natural result of weeks spent slowly learning to trust someone the rest of the world had taught her to fear. Whatever the reason, their conversations in the evenings continued, quieter now, more careful, but no less honest. Claire tried, during this period, to learn more about the man whose name now cast such a long shadow over her new life. She asked Ruth, carefully, one afternoon, while they folded linens together in the quiet laundry room. "Have you ever met Victor Lane?" Ruth's hands stilled briefly before continuing their work. "Once, years ago, when he came to the house for a meeting. I remember he had a way of looking at people, like he was deciding how useful they might be to him. Never unkind on the surface, just calculating, underneath it." "Is he dangerous?" "Everyone in that world is dangerous, dear, in their own way," Ruth said. "But some men wear it openly, and some men hide it well enough that you don't see the danger until it's already too late. Victor Lane is the second kind. That's what makes him worth worrying about." The warning stayed with Claire, adding another layer of unease to days that already felt increasingly fragile. She noticed Damien growing more withdrawn during this period as well, spending longer hours in his study, taking phone calls in low, urgent tones that stopped abruptly whenever she entered the room. She did not push him to share more than he offered, understanding instinctively that whatever he was managing required a focus she should not interrupt. Still, he made a point, even during the busiest of those tense days, to seek her out each evening, if only for a few quiet minutes, before exhaustion pulled them both toward separate rooms. Those small moments became something Claire found herself relying on more than she wanted to admit, brief pockets of calm in the middle of a situation that grew more uncertain with each passing day. "You don't have to check on me every night," she told him once, though she did not mean it, grateful every time he appeared regardless. "I know I don't have to," he said simply. "I want to." It was during one of these evenings, standing together at the edge of the garden while the last light faded from the sky, that Claire allowed herself, for the first time, to fully acknowledge the depth of what she felt for him. It was not simply gratitude for his protection, or curiosity about the connection between their families, or even the comfort of finding companionship after months of grief. It was something steadier and more complete than any of those things alone, something that frightened her slightly with how quickly and completely it had grown. She did not say any of this aloud. The timing felt wrong, with danger circling closer around them by the day, but she carried the realization with her all the same, a quiet certainty that settled deep inside her, even as the tension outside the estate walls continued building toward whatever confrontation was still to come. One night, nearly 2 weeks after Damien first mentioned Victor Lane's name, Claire found him standing alone on the back terrace, staring out at the darkened garden with an intensity that told her something new had happened. "What's wrong?" she asked, stepping up beside him. "Victor requested a meeting," Damien said without turning to look at her. "Through an intermediary, careful and formal, exactly the kind of request that usually precedes something far less formal. What does he want?" "He didn't say directly, but my people believe he intends to raise the subject of your father's old debt to my family, using it as leverage to demand concessions from me that I have no intention of giving him." Claire's chest tightened. "This is because of me. This is because of decisions made by two men long before either of us was born," Damien corrected firmly, finally turning to face her. "None of this is your fault, Claire. I need you to understand that clearly, whatever happens next." "What does happen next?" Damien exhaled slowly, the tension in his shoulders visible even in the dim light from the house. "I meet with him. I make it clear that any attempt to use you against me will be met with consequences far greater than whatever advantage he thinks he might gain. Men like Victor understand strength better than they understand reason, so I show him strength, and hope that's enough to make him reconsider. And if it isn't enough?" He did not answer immediately, and his silence told her more than any words could have. 3 days later, the meeting took place in the city, in neutral territory arranged through channels Claire did not fully understand and was not permitted to know the details of. She spent that entire day in a state of quiet, controlled panic, moving through her usual duties on autopilot, while her mind remained entirely focused on the empty driveway, waiting for the sound of a car returning. Damien came back late that evening, his expression unreadable as he stepped through the front door, and Claire, who had been unable to focus on anything productive for hours, met him in the entryway before he could even remove his coat. "How did it go?" she asked, searching his face for any sign of the outcome. "About as well as I expected," Damien said, though the tightness in his jaw suggested the meeting had been more difficult than his calm tone let on. "Victor made his demands clear. access to certain shipping routes currently under my control, framed as compensation for what he calls old debts owed to his family. I refused, obviously. He did not take the refusal well. What does that mean for us? For the house? It means he'll likely try something more direct, Damien admitted. Men like Victor rarely accept refusal gracefully, especially not in front of the associates who accompanied him to witness the conversation. I've increased security further. I've also reached out to allies who owe me favors, people who can help apply pressure of their own if this escalates. Claire felt her hands trembling slightly, an unfamiliar fear settling into her chest, different from the quiet anxiety she had carried during her first weeks in this house. This felt sharper, more immediate. The abstract danger she had always known surrounded Damien's world, now pressing directly against her own safety for the first time. I'm scared, she admitted quietly, the honesty surprising even herself. Damien's expression softened, the guarded distance he usually maintained falling away entirely as he stepped closer, reaching out to gently take her hand. I won't let anything happen to you, Claire. I need you to trust that, even if trusting anything in this world feels impossible right now. I do trust you, she said, and found, somewhat to her own surprise, that she meant it completely. That doesn't make me any less afraid. Fear is reasonable, Damien said. I'm afraid too. I don't often admit that to anyone, but I am. They stood together in the quiet entryway for a long moment, the weight of everything unspoken between them finally settling into something honest and undeniable. When he finally leaned down and pressed a gentle kiss to her forehead, Claire did not pull away. She simply let herself lean into the small comfort of it, aware that whatever safety this moment offered might not last much longer. Over the following 2 days, the household existed under a tension so thick it seemed to press against every wall of the house. Extra guards arrived, unfamiliar faces that Margaret introduced with brief, clipped explanations and no further detail. Damien barely left the property, conducting whatever business he needed to handle through phone calls and careful visitors rather than his usual trips into the city. Claire tried to maintain her normal routine, cleaning, organizing, moving through the rhythm of the house that had become so familiar to her over the past months, but she found herself constantly aware of every sound, every unfamiliar car on the driveway, every shift in the guarded expressions of the men now patrolling the grounds with far more visible intensity than before. During the day that preceded that final night, Claire noticed a stillness settling over the estate that felt different from the usual tension of the previous weeks, quieter and heavier, the kind of calm that seemed to sit just before something significant broke. Even the birds in the garden seemed subdued, and the staff moved through their duties with a careful, deliberate quiet that told Claire everyone sensed the same shift she did. She spent that afternoon helping Margaret prepare an early dinner, neither of them speaking much, both aware without needing to say it, that the day carried a weight beyond its ordinary routine. When the meal was finished and the kitchen finally quiet, Claire found herself unable to settle into any of her usual evening habits, too restless to read, too anxious to simply sit still. She sought out Damien in his study, finding him standing near the window, staring out at the darkening grounds with an intensity that told her his mind was far from the papers spread across his desk. You should rest, she told him gently, stepping up beside him. I will, once I know we're safe, he said, not turning from the window. I have people watching every entrance tonight, extra eyes on the roads leading here. If Victor makes a move, I want to know about it before his cars are anywhere near the gate. Do you think he will? Tonight? Damien was quiet for a long moment. I don't know, but I've learned not to underestimate men like him, especially not when their pride has been wounded the way his was during our meeting. She stayed with him a while longer, the two of them standing together in comfortable silence, watching the last light fade from the sky outside, both of them aware, without saying so directly, that whatever came next would test everything they had carefully built between them over these strange, unexpected months. It was on the third night after the failed meeting that everything finally came to a head. Claire was in the kitchen, unable to sleep, making herself a cup of tea in the quiet hours after midnight, when she heard raised voices near the front of the house, followed by the unmistakable sound of the main gate alarm system activating, a sharp electronic warning that cut through the silence of the estate like a blade. She rushed toward the front hallway just as Damien came down the stairs, already fully dressed despite the late hour, his expression sharp and focused in a way she had never seen from him before. "Stay here," he told her firmly, already moving past her toward the door. "Whatever you hear, whatever happens, do not leave this house." "Damien, what's happening?" "Victor's men are at the gate," he said, his voice tight with controlled urgency. "This is exactly what I was afraid of." Before she could respond, before she could say any of the dozen things suddenly crowding her mind, he was gone, moving quickly toward the front entrance with Henry Voss and 2 other guards falling into step beside him, leaving Claire standing alone in the quiet hallway, with her heart pounding, and the distant sound of car engines growing louder outside the gates. She did not stay in the hallway. She moved instead to the tall window in the front sitting room, positioning herself where she could see part of the driveway without being seen from outside, ignoring every instinct telling her to retreat further into the house. Through the darkness and the scattered light of the security lamps, she watched as a line of cars stopped just beyond the main gate, headlights cutting through the night, engines idling with a low, threatening hum. Damien stood near the gate itself, flanked by Henry and the other guards, his posture calm and controlled even from this distance, though Claire could sense the tension radiating from every line of his body. A man stepped out from the lead car, and even without being told, Claire understood immediately that this was Victor Lane. He moved with the same deliberate stillness she had noticed in Damien on her very first day, the walk of a man accustomed to being feared rather than questioned. She could not hear the words exchanged between them, but she could read enough from the tense body language, the sharp gestures, the way Victor's men shifted slightly closer whenever their leader's voice rose even slightly. Her heart pounded so hard she was certain it could be heard throughout the entire silent house. Then, without warning, Victor's eyes lifted from Damien and moved directly toward the house, toward the very window where Claire stood watching. She stepped back instinctively, though she suspected it was already too late, that he had already seen exactly what he came looking for. She heard Damien's voice rise then, sharp and commanding, in a way she had never heard from him before, and though she still could not make out every word, she caught enough fragments carried faintly on the night air. Something about consequences. Something about lines that should never be crossed. Something about protection that extended further than Victor Lane apparently understood. The standoff stretched on for what felt like an eternity, though Claire suspected it lasted only a few tense minutes in reality. Finally, she watched Victor step back toward his car, exchanging a few final sharp words with Damien, before climbing inside. The line of vehicles pulled away from the gate slowly, deliberately, headlights sweeping across the dark driveway, before disappearing into the night. Claire remained at the window long after the cars were gone, watching Damien and his guards secure the gate once more, watching the tension slowly drain from his shoulders as the immediate threat retreated into the darkness beyond the property line. He found her still standing there when he finally returned inside, his expression exhausted, but relieved in a way that eased some of the fear still gripping her chest. "Is it over?" she asked, before he could say anything. "For tonight," Damien said carefully. "Victor understands now that any attempt to reach you comes at a cost he isn't yet willing to pay. But men like him rarely give up entirely. We'll need to remain cautious." "What did you say to him?" Damien hesitated, then answered honestly. "I told him the truth, that you are under my protection, completely, and that any harm that comes to you would be treated the same as harm coming directly to me. I made it clear exactly what that would mean for him, and everyone connected to him." Claire studied his face, searching for any sign of exaggeration in his words, and found none. "You risked everything," saying that so directly. "I would risk far more than that," Damien said quietly, stepping closer, "before I let anything happen to you." The honesty in his voice, stripped of all the careful control he usually maintained, settled something deep inside Claire that had been unsteady since the very first day she stepped through his gates. She reached out and took his hand, and this time, neither of them pulled away. The following days brought a cautious kind of peace back to the household. Security remained heightened, but the immediate danger had passed, at least for now. Word eventually reached the house, through channels Claire still did not fully understand, that Victor Lane had decided to withdraw his demands entirely, unwilling to risk further conflict over a debt that, in the end, mattered less to him than his own safety. Margaret's manner toward Claire softened further in the weeks that followed, small gestures of warmth becoming a regular part of their interactions. Ruth, the quiet maid who had first mentioned the turned portrait all those months ago, began sharing more stories with Claire during their evening tea, as if the shared danger they had all lived through had finally earned Claire a true place among the household, rather than simply a temporary position within it. One evening, nearly a month after the confrontation at the gate, Claire found Damien in his study, standing in front of the portrait that had remained turned toward the wall since long before she ever arrived in this house. "I've been thinking about this for weeks," he said, without turning around as she entered. "About everything that painting represents. The friendship my father destroyed, the years of silence that followed. I think it's time it faced the right direction again." Claire stepped up beside him as he carefully lifted the frame and turned it around, revealing a painting she had never seen, an image of two young men, arms slung easily around each other's shoulders, laughing at something outside the frame of the picture, captured in a moment long before either of their lives became defined by fear and careful distance. She recognized her father's face immediately, younger and freer than she had ever known him, standing beside a younger version of the man whose choices had eventually shaped both of their lives so completely. "They look happy," she said softly, tears building unexpectedly in her eyes. "They were," Damien said, "before everything else got in the way." They stood together in front of the painting for a long while, the quiet study around them holding decades of history finally brought back into the light. When Damien finally spoke again, his voice carried a certainty Claire had not heard from him before, steady and sure, in a way that settled every remaining uncertainty she had carried since that very first day at the gates. "I know this isn't how either of us imagined our lives unfolding," he said, "but I don't regret a single part of how we got here, even the parts that frightened us both." "Neither do I," Claire admitted, and found, as she said it, that it was completely true. In the weeks that followed the confrontation, Claire began to notice a different kind of change settling over the household, subtle at first, then increasingly clear. The heavy caution that had defined her earliest days in the house started to ease, replaced by something closer to genuine ease among the staff. Guards still patrolled the grounds, and the gates still opened only for those who belonged, but the constant undercurrent of fear that had once colored every interaction had softened into something more like ordinary vigilance. Damien, too, seemed to carry himself differently. The guarded stillness that had defined him during their first meeting had not disappeared entirely. She suspected it never fully would, given the life he led. But it no longer felt like a wall built specifically to keep her out. He sought her company openly now, no longer limiting their time together to stolen evening hours, inviting her to join him for meals, asking her opinion on decisions large and small, in a way that spoke to a trust neither of them had expected to build so completely. One afternoon, he asked her to walk with him beyond the garden, past the tree line she had never explored during her months at the estate, to a quiet clearing that overlooked the distant city skyline. He had a blanket already spread out, a simple meal waiting, and Claire felt a rare, easy laughter bubble up in her chest at the unexpected gesture from a man she had once assumed incapable of anything so ordinary. "I didn't take you for a picnic kind of man," she teased, settling down beside him. "I'm discovering I contain more surprises than even I expected," he said, a warmth in his voice that had become familiar and welcome over the past months. They talked for hours that afternoon, about nothing important and everything that mattered, the kind of easy conversation that had once felt impossible between them, and now felt like the most natural thing in the world. When the sun began to set behind the distant buildings, painting the sky in soft shades of gold and rose, Damien reached for her hand, lacing his fingers through hers with a quiet certainty that needed no further explanation. "I used to think this life left no room for anything soft," he said, watching the colors shift across the horizon. "No room for trust, or peace, or anyone getting close enough to matter. You've proven me wrong about all of it." "I didn't expect to find any of this either," Claire admitted. "Not when I walked through those gates that first morning, terrified and just needing a paycheck." "And now?" She looked at him, at the man who had started as a frightening name, whispered through the city, and had become, slowly and completely, someone she trusted, with every uncertain part of her heart. Now I can't imagine being anywhere else. Months later, Claire remained in the house, though her role within it had changed in ways neither of them had fully planned, but both had come to accept with open hearts. She was no longer simply the housekeeper moving quietly through rooms she was told she could and could not enter. She had become someone Damien trusted completely, someone the entire household had come to see as more than just staff, someone who had earned her place through honesty, courage, and a willingness to face the truth of the past, even when it would have been far easier to look away. The portrait remained turned toward the room from that day forward, a quiet reminder of everything that had once been broken, and everything that had finally, against every unlikely odd, found its way back toward being whole again. Ruth once asked her, during a quiet afternoon in the garden, whether she ever regretted answering that first phone call from the recruitment agency, whether some part of her wished she had chosen a simpler, quieter life, far away from gates and guards, and the constant shadow of danger that came with loving a man like Damien Cross. Claire considered the question honestly before answering. "I think about it sometimes," she admitted, "how different everything would have been if I'd said no, but I don't think I would trade any of it, even the frightening parts. I found something here I didn't know I was still capable of finding, after everything I'd lost." "And what's that?" Ruth asked. "A reason to believe good things can still happen, even after the worst has already happened once," Claire said. "I didn't expect to find that in a house like this, but I did." The old portrait continued to hang in its rightful place in the study, a quiet symbol of everything that had once been broken finally beginning to heal. Damien spoke, in time, of slowly stepping back from the more dangerous corners of the business his father had built, of building something steadier and safer for the life he now wanted, a life that included Claire fully and completely, rather than keeping her carefully separate from the world he moved through. It would take time, he told her honestly, more time than either of them could yet predict, and there would likely be more difficult nights ahead before that safer future became fully real. But for the first time since arriving at those iron gates so many months ago, Claire found she was not afraid of what waited ahead. She had already survived the hardest part, the silence, the secrets, the fear of not knowing who she could trust in a house built on careful walls and guarded truths. And sometimes, in the quiet hours of the evening, when the house settled into its familiar sounds, and the garden outside grew still beneath the stars, Claire would think back to that very first morning at the iron gates, to the silence and the fear that had greeted her, and she would marvel at how completely one hidden photograph had changed the entire course of her life, overnight and forever.